sold into marriage, her heart was broken, until she looked into the human's eyes. HFY Sci-fi. Princess Kelara stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out at the twin suns of the Zithara system as they dipped behind the crystalline towers of her home city. The wind brushed against her long silver hair, but it could not carry away the weight pressing on her chest. Today was supposed to be a day of celebration, a union that would strengthen her people's place among the stars. Yet all Kelara felt was emptiness. She had not chosen this marriage. It had been arranged by her parents, the council, and the advisors who never stopped reminding her of her duty. The halls behind her echoed with the soft hum of preparations. Servants moved like shadows, adjusting ceremonial robes, polishing intricate jewelry, and ensuring the city's grandest hall gleamed for the event. But Kelara barely noticed. Every detail, no matter how exquisite, felt meaningless. Her mind wandered to a different life, one where she could walk among the stars freely, explore distant worlds, and choose her own companions. That life was a dream, fragile and distant, fading with every command she had been given since birth. "Princess Kelara, the ceremony will begin shortly," a soft voice called from behind. It belonged to Leora, her closest aide since childhood. Leora was small but quick, with eyes that always seemed to understand what Kelara did not voice. "I know," Kelara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not move from the balcony. The city below stretched endlessly, its shimmering towers reflecting the fading sunlight. The alien citizens moved like patterns in a living painting, their graceful forms carrying lanterns, banners, and ceremonial offerings. To anyone else, it would have been breathtaking. To her, it was another reminder of a life she had never asked for. "You must prepare yourself," Leora said gently, stepping closer. "The human envoy has arrived, Captain Elia's ward." Kelara's heart skipped. She had heard of humans, Earth's representatives in the Galactic councils, but she had never met one. Her people often whispered about them, fragile, unpredictable, emotional. Humans were primitive in technology compared to Zitharans, their ships slower, their weapons crude, yet they survived. Somehow that had earned them a place among the stars. A sudden pang of curiosity stirred in Kelara. She had always believed humans to be weak, soft, unworthy of attention, but perhaps seeing one in person would confirm it, or shatter the prejudice she had been taught. When the doors opened, the human stepped inside. Captain Elia's ward was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady gaze. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he held himself, one that did not demand authority but seemed to earn it naturally. Kelara studied him closely. There was nothing flashy, nothing ornate about him, no silvery robes, no glimmering jewelry, just a simple uniform, worn and practical, yet somehow commanding respect. He bowed slightly. "Princess Kelara," he said, his voice warm and steady. "It is an honor to meet you." Kelara inclined her head formally, but there was a flicker of interest in her eyes. Humans spoke differently, thought differently. There was no trace of the rigid protocol that defined Zitharan society in his manner. It was refreshing. The ceremony began in the grand hall, where towering pillars gleamed under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Delegates from every major star system had gathered, their faces painted with polite curiosity. Kelara moved through the crowd with the grace expected of her, while Elias followed closely, observing everything with careful attention. When the moment of vows arrived, Kelara stepped forward, her heart heavy. The words she would speak felt hollow, borrowed from tradition rather than meaning. Yet as she turned to face Elias, she noticed something that made her pause. His eyes were calm, steady, and attentive, but there was a spark of curiosity there too, as if he were seeing her, not just the princess he was expected to stand beside. For the first time, Kelara felt a tiny thread of connection. It was faint, fragile, but undeniable. The ceremony continued, a blur of speeches, blessings, and formalities. Yet Kelara found herself stealing glances at Elias. He moved through the crowd with ease, speaking softly to those who seemed lost or nervous, offering assistance without making anyone feel weak or inferior. It was a human trait, she realized, to notice the small struggles of others, to act with kindness without seeking recognition. During the feast that followed, Kelara watched him again. While the alien delegates flaunted their wealth, boasting of accomplishments and lineage, Elias listened more than he spoke. He asked questions that showed genuine interest in those around him, not just the protocol he was required to follow. Kilara could not deny it. Humans were different, and something about that difference stirred a feeling she had not experienced in years. Hope. Later, as the sun fully set and the hall emptied, Kilara wandered through the quiet corridors. Her ceremonial robes rustled softly, the weight of jewels and fabric pressing down on her. She paused at a window overlooking the city. The stars above were countless, glittering points of light against the endless black of space. She thought of freedom, of the life she had imagined, and for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to believe it might still be possible. A soft sound behind her made her turn. Elias stood there, not intruding, just watching the city with a quiet expression. "You like the view," he said simply. Kilara tilted her head, surprised. "It is beautiful," he smiled faintly. "It is, but not as much as the people who live here. They carry beauty in ways you don't always notice at first." Kilara felt a strange warmth at his words. He spoke as if he had no need to impress, no need to follow the rigid lines of ceremony, yet his presence felt steady, comforting, and safe. "Do you always see the world this way?" she asked, almost unconsciously. "I try to," he replied. "There's always something worth noticing, even in places that seem difficult." She considered his words. Perhaps humans were not weak, as she had been told. Perhaps their strength was not in their technology or armor, but in their hearts, in the choices they made when no one was watching. The night deepened, and Kilara returned to her chambers. Lying on her bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind restless. Elias' words lingered, as did the quiet certainty in his eyes. For the first time in her life, she wondered if duty and desire could coexist. Could she follow the path laid out for her and still find her own place in the galaxy? Could she allow herself to trust a human, someone from a world she had barely understood, yet whose presence had awakened something she thought long dead in her heart? Sleep came fitfully, but with it came a subtle sense of anticipation. Tomorrow she would face more ceremonies, more expectations, more politics. Yet a small, quiet thread of curiosity had been woven into her heart, and she could not ignore it. A human had entered her life, unassuming, patient, and steady. And for the first time in many cycles, Kilara felt that perhaps the universe had more to offer than rules, duty, and empty traditions. The twin moons rose over the city, casting silver light across the towers. Kilara closed her eyes, imagining a future she could not yet see clearly. But in that darkness, she felt something powerful, the first spark of hope and the first flutter of a heart that might someday choose its own path. And for the first time, she thought not of the life forced upon her, but of the life that could be, one shaped by courage, curiosity, and perhaps a human's gentle strength. The next morning, the palace buzzed with activity. Kilara moved through the corridors with practiced grace, her mind still caught between duty and curiosity. The wedding feast had ended, but the day's ceremonies were far from over. Delegates, officials, and advisors filled the halls, their voices blending into a constant hum. Kilara felt as if she were walking in a dream, surrounded by beauty and importance, yet utterly detached. Captain Elias Ward, however, seemed completely at ease. He moved among the alien guests with quiet confidence, not just following the protocol, but noticing details that others overlooked. When a young delegate from a distant planet appeared nervous, trembling under the weight of his ceremonial robes, Elias approached with a calm smile. "Here," he said, offering a simple gesture of assistance, adjusting the robe and speaking a few gentle words. The delegate blinked in surprise and relief, then nodded with gratitude. Kilara watched from across the hall. It was such a small thing, and yet it left an impression. No one in her world noticed these small human gestures. No one paused to ease another's discomfort unless it served a purpose. As the day went on, Kilara found herself observing Elias more closely. He spoke to the chefs, not to command, but to understand the flavors of their dishes. He asked questions about the architecture of the palace, listened intently to explanations, and even complimented the guards on their discipline in a way that made them stand taller with pride. It was not arrogance or dominance, just a quiet, natural respect for the effort of others. Kilara felt a strange pull. She had been raised to see humans as weak, fragile, and incapable of handling real challenges. Yet here was one, moving among the strongest, smartest, and most disciplined beings in the galaxy, and commanding respect without any display of power. Later, the council called a meeting to discuss recent tensions between neighboring star systems. The room was filled with leaders whose faces were sharp and calculating, each one seeking advantage. Kilara took her seat beside Elia's, unsure what to expect. The humans were supposed to be observers, she had been told, not participants in politics. But as the discussion began, Elia's voice rose, not to argue, but to offer solutions that no one else had considered. He suggested ways to redistribute resources that would prevent conflict, using logic combined with empathy. Kilara listened, amazed. The alien leaders were initially dismissive, but even they could not ignore the effectiveness of his proposals. By the end of the meeting, tensions that had seemed inevitable had eased, and Kilara found herself quietly impressed. During a break, she approached him. "You handled that meeting well," she said softly. "I did not expect humans to think like that." Elias looked at her with a calm smile. "We have too," he said simply. "Our world is small, fragile. We learn to solve problems with what we have. Sometimes that means thinking differently." Kilara felt a spark of understanding. There was a strength in him that had nothing to do with technology, politics, or even physical power. It was the strength of insight, of courage, and of empathy. She had spent her life surrounded by beings who valued control, appearance, and influence. Yet here was someone whose quiet human nature made him more formidable than any ruler she had known. The afternoon brought another test. A courier arrived, reporting that a small fleet from a rival system had approached the borders of Zithera, threatening to disrupt trade and diplomacy. Panic began to ripple through the council chamber. Kilara felt the familiar fear rising, but Elias' presence was steady, calming. "Show me their position," he said. Within minutes, he had analyzed the maps, suggested maneuvers to avoid direct conflict, and proposed diplomatic messages that would delay escalation without aggression. His reasoning was simple, yet brilliant. Kilara realized she had never seen such clarity in a leader, someone who could combine logic and compassion in equal measure. That night, after the council had dispersed and the palace quieted once more, Kilara found herself walking through the gardens. The air was cool, scented with alien blooms that glowed softly in the moonlight. She had hoped for solitude, but Elias was already there, examining a delicate flower with careful attention. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, noticing her. Kilara nodded. "Yes. I've walked these gardens countless times, yet I never saw them like this before." He looked up at her, eyes calm and thoughtful. "Perhaps it is not the gardens that change, but the way we look at them." Kilara paused, struck by the simplicity and truth of his words. She realized she had been so focused on duty and expectation that she had forgotten to notice the world around her, to see its details, its beauty, its small wonders. Humans saw differently. They noticed what others overlooked. They acted on what mattered, even when it seemed insignificant. As they walked together through the glowing paths, Kilara felt a quiet shift within herself. The tension that had weighed on her chest for cycles began to ease. She was beginning to trust, to feel that perhaps a different kind of life was possible. A life where she could respect her duty but also follow her own heart. The next day brought further challenges. A minor accident in the palace laboratories threatened a critical experiment that many delegates had traveled to witness. Equipment malfunctioned, chemicals spilled, and panic spread among the scientists. Kilara watched as Elias stepped forward without hesitation. He assessed the situation, guided the workers, and even improvised a simple containment method that prevented disaster. By the time the council arrived, what had seemed catastrophic had become manageable. Kilara could not hide her astonishment. How do you do this?" she asked him quietly afterward. Elias shrugged, as if it were no great feat. "I look at the problem, not at the panic. If you focus on what you can control, solutions appear." There was a truth in his words that resonated deeply. Kilara realized her own people often wasted time and energy on appearances, tradition, or fear, while humans seemed to act with direct purpose, guided by thought and feeling. She felt admiration growing in her chest, a spark that she tried to hide but could not deny. Over the following days, Kilara found herself drawn to Elias in ways she had never expected. She noticed how he treated everyone with respect, even those considered lowly in her society. She saw the subtle ways he listened, encouraged, and inspired. Her heart, once closed by duty and disappointment, began to open to the possibility that humans, so underestimated by her people, could teach lessons even the most advanced aliens had forgotten. One evening, as the sun set behind the crystal towers, Kelara stood again on the balcony, Elias beside her. They were silent for a while, watching the city bathe in the soft glow of twilight. "You look at the stars and see possibilities," Kelara said finally. "I look at them and see rules, history, duty. I am not sure I know how to change that." Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps change starts with noticing something different, something small, a person, a choice, a moment. That's how I started seeing possibilities." Kelara looked at him, truly looked, and felt something stir deep inside. A mixture of curiosity, respect, and the first flicker of something tender. Her heart, broken by a life not chosen, felt the weight of hope for the first time. She realized with a quiet certainty that the human beside her was not just an observer of their world. He was a force that could awaken courage, insight, and perhaps even love, in ways that nothing in her life had ever done before. And for the first time, Kelara allowed herself to imagine that the life she had always dreamed of, free, meaningful, and chosen, might not be impossible. It might begin with a human whose quiet strength and compassion had opened her eyes, and perhaps in time her heart. The night deepened, and the twin moons rose again, silver light spilling across the palace gardens. Kelara's mind was alive with possibilities, her heart quietly daring to hope. Somewhere in a galaxy of duty and tradition, a human had shown her a way to see differently. And she would never forget it. The following days brought attention Kelara had not expected. Reports of unrest in nearby star systems were growing more urgent, and whispers of a coordinated attack against Zithra reached the palace. The council moved with cautious authority, but Kelara noticed the fear behind their polished faces. Each leader seemed more concerned with blame than action, more intent on protecting prestige than people. Elias, however, remained calm. He moved through the halls with the same quiet confidence she had observed before. He asked questions, studied maps, spoke with intelligence officers, and never lost his composure. Kelara began to see the contrast clearly. While the council debated endlessly, the human acted decisively. She felt admiration swelling in her chest. One afternoon, the palace communications officer burst into the council chamber, face pale with urgency. "Princess Kelara." "Captain Ward, you must see this immediately. The fleet unauthorized ships have entered Zithra's space lanes." Kelara's heart raced. This was no longer hypothetical. The threat was real. The council erupted in panic. Suggestions flew, accusations shouted, and chaos spread. But Elias' presence was a steadying force. He stepped forward calmly. "Gather the star maps and relay all incoming reports. I want every ship's trajectory and status immediately. Let's not waste energy panicking. Let's solve this." Kelara followed him as he moved from the chamber to the strategic room, where holographic displays projected the approaching fleet. Red markers dotted the map, showing the alien ships converging on Zithra. The human studied the patterns, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're trying to overwhelm the defenses quickly," he said, pointing to a cluster of ships near a key outpost. "But if we can anticipate their movements, we can split their attention and defend efficiently. Some diversionary tactics might give us time to negotiate, and we avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Kelara blinked. She had never seen strategy executed with such calm precision. Her people often relied on overwhelming strength or strict protocol, yet here was a human using observation, logic, and creativity to prevent disaster. She felt pride in him and a growing sense of trust. The next hours were tense. Kelara watched as Elias coordinated the defense. He spoke with pilots and officers, directing maneuvers and adjusting plans in real time. His orders were clear but respectful, and the crews responded with confidence. Kelara realized that humans, while physically weaker than Zitharans, possessed a remarkable ability to adapt quickly and inspire loyalty. When the first wave of enemy ships approached, the humans' plan was already in motion. Some fleets engaged the attackers directly, while others created feints, drawing ships away from vulnerable areas. Hollow communications from the front lines reported that the attackers were confused, unsure how to respond to these unexpected tactics. Kelara's heart raced with each update. She could see the skill and ingenuity of this human working in real time, and she felt something shift within herself. Her admiration had grown into something deeper. She understood finally that true strength was not measured by size, armor, or firepower. It was measured by courage, intelligence, and the ability to act when it mattered most. As the sun set, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Not a single civilian casualty had occurred, and the attackers, frustrated by the human-led defense, had retreated. The council was speechless. They had expected devastation, yet through strategy and calm reasoning, disaster had been averted. Kilara found herself beside Elias on the balcony once more, overlooking the city as twilight cast long shadows over the towers. "You saved us," she said softly, unable to hide the awe in her voice. He shook his head. "No one person saves a people. But we can work together, and sometimes thinking differently makes the impossible possible." Kilara studied him, realizing the truth in his words. Humans may lack Zithara's natural gifts or technological superiority, but they made up for it with determination, creativity, and heart. It was a lesson she would never forget. The following morning, Kilara received a private report from her security team. A faction within the council was unhappy with Elias' influence. They feared a human leading decisions and began plotting to undermine him. Kilara's chest tightened. Politics could destroy even the strongest alliances, but she was not about to let fear dictate her actions. She had seen what this human could do, and she would not let him be sabotaged for the sake of pride. "Captain," she said later in a quiet hallway, "some of the council members, they are trying to make you seem incompetent. They think you don't belong here." Elias looked at her, calm and steady. "I expected it. Change is difficult. They're used to a way of thinking that rewards appearances and authority over results. But actions speak louder than whispers, Princess. Let them watch what we accomplish." Kilara nodded. His words gave her courage. She realized she was no longer just an observer of human strength. She was an ally, willing to stand with him. Over the next few days, they faced more challenges. Supply lines were disrupted, communications sabotaged, and spies attempted to gain access to sensitive information. Yet with every obstacle, Elias remained composed. He found solutions that were clever, practical, and humane. Kilara assisted where she could, observing closely, and learning that humans did not seek to dominate but to solve. She felt her admiration deepen, growing into a quiet affection she had not expected. One evening, as the stars shone above the palace, Kilara and Elias sat in the gardens again. The air was cool, carrying the scent of alien blossoms, and the city below shimmered in the moonlight. "You do not seem afraid," Kilara said softly. "Even with danger so close, you remain calm. How?" Elias smiled faintly. "Fear is natural, but letting it control you is a choice. I focus on what can be done, not what might go wrong." Kilara felt a warmth in her chest. The human beside her was teaching her lessons she had never learned in years of rigorous training: patience, courage, trust, and the power of thoughtful action. Her admiration was no longer just intellectual, it had become personal. Days turned into nights, and every shared moment, every problem solved together, strengthened a bond Kilara had never thought possible. She saw the world differently now. Protocol and status mattered less. Courage, compassion, and intelligence mattered more. And Elias embodied all three. When another minor skirmish erupted near a remote trading station, Kilara and Elias were called to lead a diplomatic mission. Aliens had started rumors, spreading panic about human interference, hoping to stir unrest. Elias remained calm, listening patiently to each party, understanding their fears and finding compromises that satisfied all sides. Kilara marveled at his approach. Where her people relied on authority, he relied on understanding. And yet it was equally effective. By the time they returned to Zithara, Kilara realized that her heart had changed. The spark of hope that had stirred when she first met Elias had grown into a steady flame. She respected him deeply, not for power or status, but for his mind, his courage, and his heart. She felt safe in his presence in a way she had never felt before, and more than that, she felt inspired to be braver herself. That night, as they stood on the balcony once more, Kilara felt a quiet thrill at the thought of the future. The human beside her had proven that strength came in many forms, and that courage and empathy could change the course of worlds. For the first time, she considered what it would mean to follow her heart, even in a world bound by duty and expectation. Elias looked at her, noticing the change. "You've grown stronger," he said quietly. "More confident. I can see it in the way you look at the stars now." Kilara smiled faintly, feeling a truth she could not deny. "Perhaps I am learning from the best teacher I could have," she said softly. He met her gaze, steady and unwavering, and in that moment the bond between them deepened. It was no longer just respect, admiration, or curiosity. It was something stronger, something unspoken yet undeniable. Together they had faced danger, politics, and uncertainty, and through it all, Kelara realized that this human had not only saved her world, but had begun to awaken her own courage and heart. The twin moons rose over the city, casting silver light over the towers and gardens. Kelara felt a quiet determination rising within her. Whatever the future held, she would face it with the human beside her, learning from him, trusting him, and perhaps, in time, opening her heart fully to the possibility of something she had never imagined. A bond built not on duty or tradition, but on respect, courage, and love. The galaxy was wide, full of unknowns, and danger still lingered on the horizon. Yet Kelara knew one thing with certainty. With Elias by her side, she would face it all differently than she had ever imagined. And for the first time, the future felt not like a chain, but like a path she could choose to walk freely. The tension in the palace was palpable. Weeks of preparation, diplomacy, and quiet maneuvering had led to this moment. Intelligence reports indicated that the rival faction had amassed a fleet at the edge of Zithara space, intending to strike swiftly and decisively. The council, still shaken by previous threats, argued endlessly about strategy. Kelara, however, no longer felt paralyzed by duty. She had learned from Elias, and she knew that action, courage, and clear thinking mattered more than politics and pride. Elias was already at the command center, reviewing data, speaking with officers, and coordinating defenses. His calm presence drew Kelara in, a steady reminder that even in the face of danger, reason and courage could prevail. She approached quietly, watching as he worked, analyzing movement patterns and predicting enemy strategies with uncanny accuracy. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked softly. Elias shook his head. "Not exactly like this, but I've faced impossible situations. You learn to stay calm, observe carefully, and trust your judgment. Panic is the enemy, not the opposing fleet." Kelara felt a surge of admiration. The human's quiet confidence was more powerful than any weapon, more effective than any army. She realized that strength could come in unexpected forms, and that she had been blind to it for far too long. The council began their discussions, suggesting traditional approaches, overwhelming force, strict defensive positions, and preemptive strikes. Elias listened patiently, then countered with a plan that combined precision, strategy, and diplomacy. "We don't need to destroy them outright," he said firmly. "We can protect our people and create an opportunity for negotiation. Their fleet is strong, but they are overconfident. We can use that against them." Kelara nodded silently. She trusted him completely. Over the past days, she had seen his strategy succeed, his calm judgment save lives, and his insight inspire others. His plan was unconventional, but it made sense. Together, they began coordinating the city's defenses. When the first signals of the enemy fleet appeared on the scanners, tension shot through the palace. Red markers blinked rapidly, showing the enemy ships advancing in formation. Kelara and Elias worked side by side, issuing commands, adjusting tactics, and communicating with allied fleets. Every decision mattered. Every moment counted. As the alien ships approached, Elias identified weaknesses in their formation. He devised a series of feints and diversions, sending small Zitharan fleets to lure segments of the enemy away from critical points. Kelara observed in awe as his plan unfolded perfectly. The enemy commanders, confident in their strength, took the bait. Their fleet fractured, leaving key positions vulnerable. Kelara felt her pulse quicken. This was more than a test of strategy, it was a test of courage, trust, and collaboration. And in Elias, she saw not just a human, but a leader who could stand among the greatest minds and warriors of Zithara. Suddenly, alarms blared. A strike team had managed to breach the outer defenses, aiming for the central city tower where key council members were coordinating operations. Panic spread among the guards. Kelara felt her heart pound, but Elias remained composed. "Stay calm," he instructed. "I'll handle this. Move civilians to safe zones and keep the communications lines open." Kelara followed his directions, guiding people quietly and efficiently. She saw the fear in their eyes, but Elias' presence inspired confidence. They were not helpless. They had a plan, and a human had shown them that courage could change the outcome. Elias led a small defensive team to intercept the intruders. Using a combination of strategy, agility, and quick thinking, he outmaneuvered the attackers. He anticipated their moves, creating traps and blocking pathways, all while minimizing harm. Kalara watched from a safe distance, heart swelling with admiration and awe. The human's actions were precise, yet compassionate. He fought to protect, not to dominate. When the strike team was neutralized, Elias returned to her side, his uniform slightly scuffed but his expression calm. "They underestimated us," he said quietly, "and they underestimated the strength that comes from acting together." Kalara nodded, feeling a rush of pride. She realized that humans were not fragile as her people had believed. They were resilient, resourceful, and capable of extraordinary courage, and she had been fortunate to witness it firsthand. The battle was not yet over. Enemy ships continued to advance, attempting to regroup and strike again. But with Elias directing the defenses, the Zitharan fleets moved with precision. The enemy's confidence faltered further as they faced coordinated maneuvers that they could not predict. Kalara observed the brilliance of human strategy in action, the ability to adapt, improvise, and inspire loyalty without fear or arrogance. By nightfall, the last of the enemy ships retreated. The threat had been neutralized without devastating losses, thanks to Elias' leadership and the cooperation of the Zitharan forces. Exhaustion weighed on the council members, but their astonishment and respect for the human envoy were evident. Kalara stood beside Elias, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. Elias shook his head modestly. "We did it together. You helped as much as I did." "The courage and intelligence of your people made this possible." Kalara smiled, realizing that she had changed. The events of the past weeks had reshaped her understanding of strength, loyalty, and bravery. She had witnessed firsthand the extraordinary qualities of humans, qualities her own people often overlooked or undervalued, and she had come to trust and respect Elias completely. In the days that followed, the palace celebrated not just the survival of the city, but the partnership that had saved it. Delegates praised the ingenuity and courage of the human envoy, and Kalara felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing him recognized. Yet she knew that her admiration went far deeper than politics or diplomacy. Elias had opened her eyes, not just to human capability, but to the possibility of trust, hope, and love. One evening, Kalara invited Elias to walk with her through the gardens. The twin moons cast silver light over the blossoms, and the air was calm and cool. She felt the weight of the past weeks, the stress, the fear, and the triumph, but also a newfound clarity. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for me, but for everyone here." "I never thought a human could make such a difference." Elias looked at her, eyes steady and warm. "You've changed too," he replied. "You've learned to trust yourself, to trust others, and to see possibilities beyond duty and expectation. That courage, it comes from you as much as from me." Kalara felt a flutter in her chest. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. For the first time in her life, she felt that her heart was free to consider more than duty, more than obligation. She could imagine a future shaped by choice, by partnership, and perhaps by affection. As they walked through the glowing paths, Kalara realized how much she had come to admire Elias, not just for his intelligence or bravery, but for his compassion, his steadiness, and his unwavering humanity. She had once felt trapped by her life, by expectations she had never chosen. Now she saw a path forward, illuminated by the courage and heart of a human who had entered her life and transformed it completely. When they returned to the balcony overlooking the city, Kalara gazed at the stars above, thinking of the endless possibilities the galaxy held. She felt hope, trust, and a quiet determination. The trials of the past weeks had tested her in every way, and through it all, Elias had been by her side, not as a savior, but as a partner, a teacher, and an inspiration. "I never believed humans could be this strong," she said softly, turning to him. "But I see now, it is not strength of body or technology, but strength of heart and mind that truly matters." Elias smiled, a gentle warmth in his expression. "That is what makes us human, and now it seems you understand it too." Kalara felt her heart swell with an emotion she could not name: pride, admiration, gratitude, and something more. She realized that the human beside her had not only helped her people survive, but had awakened a part of herself she had long thought lost. The twin moons shone brighter as if blessing the moment, silver light reflecting on the towers and gardens of the city. Kalara took a deep breath, feeling a peace she had never known. She knew that challenges would come again, that the galaxy was vast and unpredictable. But for the first time, she felt ready. She had learned from a human that courage, intelligence, and compassion could overcome fear, prejudice, and danger. And in Elias, she had found not just a guide or ally, but someone who had awakened her heart to the possibility of connection, trust, and perhaps love. The night deepened, and the city below glimmered in quiet triumph. Kalara stood beside Elias, feeling a sense of partnership, respect, and hope. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. A human had entered her world not to dominate or command, but to inspire, protect, and teach. And in doing so, he had shown her the extraordinary power of humanity, the power to transform not just a city, a people, or a battle, but a heart. And in that moment, Kalara knew that her future was no longer bound solely by duty or expectation. It was filled with possibility, shaped by courage, intelligence, and the gentle strength of a human whose eyes had opened hers to a new way of seeing the galaxy and herself.